Welcome to Vanadium. I'm Chris Rankin. The more I learn about this mad world, the more mysterious it seems. It's well known that mental illness can besiege a single mind, fill a psyche with bizarre and threatening hallucinations and delusions, take over perception and even consciousness. The mind, the most intricate system of the body, is as prone to ailment as the lungs, the heart, or the feet. Perhaps even more so due to the brain's unmatched, unimaginable complexity. The diseases of the mind are more frightening and mysterious than most of the illnesses of the body. They're less understood by physicians and researchers. Psychological problems aren't easily discernible by blood tests, and there's no equivalent to antibiotics for depression. There's no cure or magic pill for schizophrenia. For those suffering and those around them, mental illness is devastating and frightening when it affects just one person at a time, a single mind, a single soul. But what happens when mental illness hits a group of minds, infecting an interconnected population, very much the same way a virus would infect a physical organ? But what happens when mental illness hits a group of minds, infecting an interconnected population, very much the same way a virus would infect a physical organ? Groups can go crazy in very much the same way a single person does. It's been well documented throughout history, and mass psychogenic illness, also called conversion disorders, and formerly mass hysteria, are even recognized in the DSM, the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual, what's considered the gold standard by physicians and psychiatrists. If you look back in history, it all seemed to start with dancing. Dancing plague, also called choreomania, was a social phenomenon occurring in Europe between the 14th and 17th centuries. It always started with a single isolated person who just started dancing in the street, then couldn't will themselves to stop. It was referred to as dancing, but the detailed accounts describe something more like semi-coordinated seizures than actual dancing. I don't think there was much rhythm involved. Then, the strangest thing kept happening. It would spread until it involved 2, 3, then entire groups of people dancing erratically. Passers-by the scene described feeling possessed and unable to resist the urge to join the display. The crowds were known to grow to sometimes thousands at a time. People tried to stop, but their legs, their bodies, wouldn't obey. Many of the afflicted cried out for help. People tried to stop the dancers, many of whom were in agony while they gyrated in the streets, but nothing worked. It seemed people couldn't stop until they collapsed into exhaustion. The mania affected men, women, and children, who danced until they all dropped unconscious in the streets. One of the first major outbreaks was in the Holy Roman Empire, which is modern-day Germany, in 1374, and the phenomenon quickly spread throughout Europe. Dancing plague moved through the population, just like a virus. No one at the time understood what was happening, and scientists aren't doing that much of a better job today with an explanation. One of the top theories is that the dancers suffered from a rare fungal poisoning, which was known as St. Anthony's fire in the Middle Ages. During floods and damp periods, ergot fungi were able to grow and affect rye and other crops. Ergotism can cause hallucinations and convulsions, but it can't account for the other strange behavior associated with this phenomenon. Other theories suggest that the symptoms were similar to encephalitis, epilepsy, and maybe typhus. But as with ergotism, these really can't account for all of the symptoms. There seems to be something else going on. Some experts believe dancing mania may have been simply the result of stress and tension caused by some serious natural disasters at the time, such as plagues and floods. Stress can make you do strange things. Group or collective mental illnesses don't just manifest with dancing. It can get a lot darker. The Salem witch trials, which started in 1692 in colonial Massachusetts, people started seeing witches everywhere. Adolescent girls Abigail Williams, Betty Paris, and Elizabeth Hubbard began to have fits that were described by a minister as beyond the power of epileptic fits or natural disease. The events resulted in the Salem witch trials, a series of hearings which resulted in the execution of 20 citizens and the death of 5 other citizens in Salem, who were accused of practicing witchcraft. The episode is known as one of America's most notorious cases of mass hysteria. Wurzburg, in 1749, an outbreak of screaming, squirming, and trance in a nunnery led to the execution of a suspected witch. And the Great Fear was a well-documented, general psychotic break suffered by the entire country of France at the start of the French Revolution. It took place between 17th of July and the 3rd of August of 1789. It must have been intense with such a well-defined time period going back that long ago. Mass psychogenic illness outbreaks occurred in factories following the Industrial Revolution in the United States, England, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, as well as Singapore. W.H. Foon, the Minister of Labor in Singapore, gave a detailed case study of 6 outbreaks of mass psychogenic illness in Singapore factories between 1973 and 1978. The symptoms were characterized as hysterical seizures of screaming and general violence, often where tranquilizers were ineffective. Trance states, where a factory worker would claim to be speaking under the influence of a spirit or jinn. And terror spells. Some workers complained of unprecedented fear, of being cold, numb, or dizzy. Outbreaks would typically subside in about a week. The Tanjanuka laughter epidemic of 1962 was an outbreak of laughing attacks, rumored to have occurred in or near the village of Kinshasa on the western coast of Lake Victoria in the modern nation of Tanzania. It affected over 1,000 people at 14 different schools. The laughing started on January 31st, 1962, at a boarding school in Kinshasa. It started with 1, then 2, 3 students, and spread throughout the school, affecting 95, over half the pupils. It got so bad the school closed within a few months on March 18th. The epidemic then spread to nearby Nshamba. In April and May, 217 mostly young villagers were infected with out-of-control, eerie laughter, beyond their capacity to stop. The laughter reports were widely accompanied by descriptions of fainting, flatulence, respiratory problems, rashes, crying, and screaming. Eventually, 14 schools had to be shut down because there were over 1,000 children infected, crying in agony because they couldn't stop laughing. It was pandemonium. The school was actually sued for allowing the children to transmit it to the surrounding area. 18 months after it started, the laughing plague just died off. It left the people as quickly as it came, with no real explanation. Science hasn't gone much further to explain this, but it's really just given it a couple of new fancy names. In the DSM-5, conversion disorder, or functional neurologic symptom disorder, is a diagnostic applied to patients who present with neurological symptoms, such as numbness, blindness, paralysis, or fits, which are not consistent with well-established organic causes. Sigmund Freud referred to this condition as both hysteria and conversion disorder throughout his career. He believed those impacted could not live in a mature relationship or lead a normal life, and that those with the condition were unwell in order to achieve, as he put it, some kind of secondary selfish gain. French psychologist, physician, philosopher Pierre Janet, the other prominent theoretician on this subject, argued that the symptoms arose through the power of suggestion, acting on a personality that's vulnerable to dissociation. In this hypnotic state, the subject's experience of their legs, for example, is split off from the rest of their consciousness, resulting in a loss of control of the legs. Same thing with partial loss of control over voice in the case of laughing disease. The hypnosis theory is the one that resonates with me. When you look a little bit into hypnosis, you realize you don't need a swinging pocket watch or a teacup and spoon to hypnotize someone. People can, and often do, actually hypnotize themselves. Hypnosis is just another state of consciousness. accessible to us with focus and practice. It was at one time even used as a surgical anesthetic method prior to the development of drugs. Maybe there is something to the subtle power of suggestion with the cases of these dancing plagues, mysterious waves across cities of faintings and rashes, and laughing epidemics. Something to the sound of laughter, the movement of the dancers, the panic in the air. Maybe there's a hypnotic power to it. But it still doesn't explain how these epidemics started. These cases remind me of how connected people are to one another, how susceptible we can be to the influence of others, how our minds may not always be fully under our perfect will and command. Thank you very much. This is Chris Rankin with Vanadium.